wherever that is, wherever we are in the discussion, like a good therapist, I'm going to thank you and tell you that is all the time we have for today. Because no one needs to sit through 2 Sundays in a row of that kind of length of conversation. So that's number one. Housekeeping item number 2, and you guys are going to hate this, but I got so many emails after our last conversation that were thanking us, the Wardens and I, for rephrasing things that people had come to hear, but just sort of going on about how is it that we can't have better sound. And the truth is, because we just don't have the capability, but we do with the microphone. The only one that did work completely throughout. But as you can see, this is all the cord I have. So, if you have a question or a comment today, I want you to stand up, graciously walk up here, pick up this microphone or take it from my hand and ask your question or make your comment. That will make sure that everyone at home can hear you, because even though they love my voice, they like yours better. Okay? So I know that's a little bit strange, but I hope that doesn't discourage you from getting up to chat, and if it does, I suppose our formation will be very short. So welcome. Today is another session of asking brave questions. So we're back into the regular cycle of what we were planning to do. So as always, what questions do you bring today? What's your brave question? It can be anything on your heart. Listen. And right out the gate, a good start to the microphone.
I'm trying to follow directions. How's that? Okay, recently I've been reading some things about, well, it's in Brian McLaren's book, about Do I Stay Christian? And I think he says, if I understand it right, it's suggesting that Christianity has to evolve. And on some level, okay, yeah, I kind of get that. We don't believe the same things we did in the Middle Ages. Okay, I get that. But then I don't know where's the line between evolving or being just so wishy-washy that we don't stand for anything, or the fact that this place has always always has stood for eternal truths. Those things kind of, I would just love to hear more about that from you.
Yeah, well, here we go. Yeah, it's a great question, and it's certainly at the core of what Brian McLaren is talking about in his book. So what does it mean to evolve? And you brought in a lot of good questions, and unfortunately, one of the things I have for you is a question back. You made a statement at the very end that said, we have been known to stand for eternal truths. What eternal truths? Not a trick question. I'm just curious what that means. And maybe that's for everybody. What does that mean for you? And just use your outdoor voice. You don't have to come all the way. Say that again? So the creed, Graham says part of it's the creed. What else?
Love of God.
Love of God. Debbie says love of God. Melissa?
God created the world.
God,
It is good.
it is good.
God is with us.
God is with us. Okay. Great. Others? Love your neighbor as yourself. Any other eternal truths that we are known to stand for? Lon?
Sort of an obvious one. Christ is the Son of God.
Christ is the Son of God.
He died.
He died.
He is our Savior.
Eric says he is our Savior. Okay. These are good eternal truths. What are the ones we don't talk about that are also eternally true? Because I think this is at the core of what Brian McLaren points us to. It's hard in life to separate theology from lived practice. And indeed, that's sort of part of what theology means. It's this embodied way of understanding faith through the lens of what we experience. The church, just like all the rest of us, is a living organism made up of tons of living organisms. And so there are a lot of things that we have done, our or been a part of in the church's history that I think McLaren points us toward in this question about evolution of the church. Now, this is a tricky subject because it's like, evolve. You know, there's this kind of ickiness to the Darwinian nature of a comment like an evolving church. But here's the truth. The church that Jesus began, or Jesus' followers began, was an evolution from a strict adherence to a purity culture and a Jewish faith. In the medieval period that you spoke about, Melissa, in your question, that was an evolution from the way of love that Jesus' followers had set up. The church that we have today is an evolution of that. How do I know that? Because there are like 10,000 types of Christianity. So this is part of the human condition. It's part of who we are because we bring our humanity here. So my question about what are the eternal truths that we don't talk about is equally relevant in this conversation because there's lots that we do and have been a part of. You know, our confession today, forgive us for the evil we have done and the evil done on our behalf. The church is not a pure place. The church is not an innocent place. The church is not a safe place for all people, always. So when McLaren talks about this, I think, it's easy for me to say this because he's not here, I think that he's asking us to take a look at all sides of our historicity and our theology, and to ask the tough questions about who it is that we are, what is true for us, and also to consider what other people outside of our group, outside of these walls, what do they know or think of as an eternal truth about the church. A robust spirituality, the tool of spiritual reflection, gives us the ability to think through questions like that, not with a lens of criticism, but one of going, I'm so curious. What do people think about my church? This one. We don't even have to think about everybody else's church, but just this one. When they think St. David's on Glenview Road in Shermer, what do they know about us? What have they learned from the things that we do? What have they learned from the things we do not do, or do not say, or whatever? McLaren asks us to think about an evolving church, which is to say, one that's asking these questions and nimble enough to hold on to those good truths, the eternal truths that you've all mentioned, and also to think about ways of entry for all people. So it's not about letting go of something, or I think, Melissa, your words were wishy-washy. So it's not about being wishy-washy or not knowing what you believe or think, because you do. You already said it, right? You know that. It's about thinking about how we live and embody those beliefs in a public way, so that everyone else, even if they don't hear us say all those eternal truths, they see it in our lives. And because they see it, they want to know what's going on in this strange place at the corner of Shermer and Glenview Road. So is that helpful at all? It's hard to do because it makes us look back at our history, and it ain't all good. Other brave questions. What do you got? Lori, come on up. Come on down. You're the next contestant.
This is a question for you, Matt. I get the impression that nowhere in the Gospels does it or rather does Jesus, or is Jesus credited as having said, I am going to die for the redemption of the sins of the world. Did he anywhere specifically say that? And of course, this is leading to substitutionary atonement.
Yeah. Thank you, Lori. Go sit down, Lori. Question. Woo. Substitutionary atonement. Yeah, let the lecture begin. Everyone have your pens and notebooks ready for, Jesus never said that. Jesus never said that. We said that. Why? Or he says to try and rationalize what happened. I'm going to stop it there. Yes, that's it. That's exactly how our brain works. That's a psychological response to trauma. They didn't have a language for this. Back in that period, a traumatic thing happens, and we have to figure it out. We have to make sense of it. The way we do that is telling stories. There's a reason that the Bible is canonized. There's a reason that all these collections of books and stories made their way into, dare I say, troublesomely choreographed set of readings, right? They're not chronological. They're not in any discernible order except the ones that we create for ourselves. But the stories are the important thing because we needed to make sense of what had happened. Jesus never said, I am going to die for your salvation. The closest he got was the pleading, Lord, if it is your will, let this cup pass from me. Is there any question that Jesus in the writings we have understood that he was going to die and that there was a greater reason for that? No, that's not argued at all. There's no scholar that would tell you that Jesus was some hapless bystander, that all these terrible things were happening to. We are the bystanders. We are also the cause of what's happening there. Jesus knew that he was going to die. We maybe didn't know that. If you're looking for proof of that, then I would tell you, as controversial as it may seem, so everyone deep breath, take a look at the life and story of Judas. If you think that we knew that we were participating in this cosmic story of salvation, then Judas would never have done what he did. He gets a bad rap, and lots of people would tell you that. There are way smarter people than me that wrote whole books about this. But you can see it in this exchange, this moment of grief when Judas goes back to say, take this silver, take it back. And he's refused. There's this moment of real grief about that. Grief to the point of a death by suicide, which is not something that's often discussed in the Bible. And yet, because it exists there, we have the ability to talk about subjects as difficult and painful as suicide in a modern world. So, no, Jesus didn't talk about that because that wasn't necessary for the story, at least from my perspective. Substitutionary atonement is also another man-made invention. Again, we needed to come up with something to make this better. Right? This trauma, this hole in our souls, we had to come up with something. So we create the theology of Jesus substituting himself to create atonement for us. Did this happen? Yes. Is it at the core of what we believe or are told is necessary for a Christian life? No. We are told to believe in Jesus, to walk the way of Jesus. And that, of course, includes the story of his death because we need to understand what's really at stake for us. All of the things of safety in this world are put away if we're really following the way of Jesus. Jesus was a radical, political rabbi. So radical, in fact, that the state executed him with our help to keep him quiet. Thank God we're all still here today, because that means they failed. So a substitution for an atonement theology is not necessary for us, and I think the prophet Micah today would have a little something to say about that too, as a matter of fact. We know the way of love from Jesus, and nowhere did Jesus say, you must die for me. Lots of people did. Nowhere did Jesus say, it is important that I die for you, on behalf of you. He just did it. Micah might argue because he did justice, he loved kindness, and he walked humbly. That's a close answer for me. I don't know if it addresses everything you want, but come on down.
So are you saying that these words he says that you say during communion, he didn't ever say those? He seemed to have known he was going to die, and that's why.
Which words?
These words right here. Drink this, all of you. This is my blood of the new covenant, which is poured out for you and for all the forgiveness of sins. Do it for remembrance of me. this is my body which is given for you. Do this for remembrance of me. It sounds like that's what he's saying.
That is, in fact, exactly what he said, and those are what's called the words of institution. No, you're not misinterpreting it, but one needs to always keep in mind the orientation of words like this. So those are prayers that are found in liturgy, and the quick question back would be, who writes liturgy? Who? Cranmer. That is correct. Cranmer wrote this, not Jesus. And it is a pulling from words that are known to have been said by Jesus. But there's not anything specifically there other than our own interpretation of foreshadowing that would say he's telling us this particular thing. He's aware that he's in trouble, and that has been known for some time. In fact, since a couple of weeks ago, when the gospel says he went to Capernaum by the sea when his friend John was arrested. So Jesus is aware that he is an enemy of the state. He is frightened. He is talking about that in the context of the final gathering of his disciples. Is he aware that he is going to die? Yes. But is it trying to lay out a complicated theology on behalf of all the church? I'm not so sure about that. We'd have to ask another better theologian.
So that's sort of based on what he might have said at the Last Supper, and we don't really know.
Well, that's right, and we don't know because, it was written down quite a few moons after that supper was said to have happened. So this is all about a collective story, and we think about, with nothing controversial in this, any great mythical story, no matter what we're looking at, regular fiction versus Bible, there's always this moment where things are told over and over again, and finally someone writes them down. It's a fun game of telephone, though. Who knows? And the bigger question is, does it even matter if we know exactly what Jesus said or didn't say? I could make the argument for all of us that the thing that does matter is the way we approach that ritual, the way we approach that liturgy, the way those words sink into us, and what they speak to our soul. And that's always been good enough for me, because that means you're engaging with a spiritual practice and you're building meaning for yourself in it, instead of just following instructions. Does that make sense? But it is, you got to be careful. Thomas Cranmer wrote that because he was told to, and then later we burned him. Melissa, you're back at it. Go ahead. Don't.
Oh, yeah. So, this all makes me a little nervous.
Okay.
Didn't Paul? Well, first of all, I thought, this is my blood, take this in remembrance of me. Was that in a gospel?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so we've got that there.
Mm-hmm.
And then didn't Paul say Jesus died on the cross for our sins?
Okay. Is
Did
Paul
he?
Jesus?
Didn't he say that?
Is Paul Jesus? Did Paul have any motivations that might need to be taken into consideration? This is part of the sort of the hard work of theological reflection, is to go, what are all the layers of this onion? Think about when these things were actually written down. So yes, these words are in the Gospel of John. It seems as though one of the things we're talking about right now, maybe a little left-handed, is whether or not we read these texts literally. So whether or not when we pick up the Bible and we read or we hear the Gospel and we go, well, that's what it said. It said it right there. Someone just read it right back to me, so that's what it is. In the Episcopal Church, for a very long time, we have held that a literal interpretation of the Bible is, at best, not accurate. At worst, not at all necessary. So it's a question of how you get into the text, which I do believe is absolutely critical. The book of John, one of the latest recordings of gospel texts of the words happening. Who wrote that? Did John write it? Who knows? Who cares? probably a bunch of scribes that worked in a monastery that followed the teachings of John were the ones that gathered these things. And when you look at John versus the other synoptic gospels, you see a very different approach. It's much more ethereal, and it's just sometimes a little strange. John seems to be seeing, again, to your original question, this sort of evolving picture of what the church is. And in the midst of that, there's a solidification of rituals. It's very important for the emerging church, this number of hundreds of years after Jesus' death. We're getting some traction. People are paying attention to us. So we need to start doing things properly, right and good. Everything we do needs to have a very specific meaning, and that's where these rituals come from. Building on those words, people like Paul, who created a structured church, essentially, that we see, starting from house churches in the time that he was writing, which some of them were quite large, all the way to where we are today. They're building structure. People are starting to ask lots of questions. They thought Jesus was coming back last week. Jesus still not back. People are dying. They are being persecuted. They are searching for structure. And so these letters that go back and forth, that I would argue those folks never imagined would be read in the church today. If you don't believe that, look at how they start. To Paul and Silas and the letters and and grace and peace to you, my friends. And I hear good things about your mom and them. How's it going? Also, treat these people better. These are just letters. They're flying back and forth like emails. And today we read them as gospel, read them as the epistles, the letters of our church. And so you got to think about, what are they trying to accomplish? If we were to read it literally, and Jesus meant for that to be important to us, then the words of institution would probably sound something like, take, eat, for this is my body which is about to be sacrificed for you to atone for your sins. Every time you eat bread, think of my sacrificed body. Take, drink. This is my blood that will be poured out all over the ground from the end of the spear. I'm doing this for you, so every time you drink something, think about what's been poured out for your life. Jesus didn't say that. Jesus, like all of the great prophets before, and now in this messianic role, speaks with the power of metaphor and poetry. There's a beautiful fluidity to everything that's being said here, and the idea that the Episcopal Church holds up today is that this ritual becomes one of remembrance. It's a way of you entering into a spiritual unknown and creating meaning around it. Maybe meaning is even the wrong word. Creating remembrance. How do you think about the things broken open for you, poured out in your life, that you remember into something else? It was said to me in seminary, and has always stuck with me, the idea that our Eucharist is a feast. We talk about it in the language of feast. Right? You come to the table to feast at the supper prepared for you. Well, it's a pretty meager feast. I don't know how many of you got the small round wafer today. It's a pretty meager feast, and it's often stale. So, is that really what we're trying to do? Are we trying to remember? Are we trying to take the smallest, meagerest thing that we have to remember that ordinary stuff can be holy, depending on how we treat it? And look at yourselves in this. You maybe haven't examined this very much, but it's one of the things I love about church. Have you ever stopped to think about what you look like when you walk up here? I love it. You're all so different. And some of you come forward with your hand pictured out. Some of you don't have anything ready at all, almost as though it were a bit of a surprise when you got up here. Maybe it was. Maybe you were just following the person in front of you. I don't know. Some of you come forward with your hands out and your eyes up. Some of you are looking down the whole time. Some of you, when you get that, you just close your fingers over the top of it. Some of you just pop it right in. Some of you move it to your chest. Why? I don't have an answer for you, but I know it's beautiful. I know it's holy. And there's no blood and there's no body in your hand. There's only what you bring into that ritual. And we remember. So, I don't know. That's what I'm thinking here. You can stay. Just...
Is this okay, everybody, if I, because I feel like I'm, okay.
You're allowed to monopolize.
Oh, man, this is a dream. Okay, so the creed says, for our sake, he was crucified under Pontius Pilate.
Mm-hmm.
He suffered death and was buried. Now, I have heard the articulation that God demanded a blood sacrifice, i.e., Jesus dying on the cross, in order to redeem our sins. And I have a real problem with that, because that sounds like a very cruel God. So, for our sake, he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. We often say Jesus died on the cross for our sins, so what the heck do we mean?
Yeah, a great question, and as always, an expected nuanced. So let's break it down in pieces and begin with one of the eternal truths. We believe in the Episcopal Church that Jesus died for our sins. Unquestioned. I believe that too. What does it mean is a very different thing. And so let's back up. You start with the Nicene Creed. One of the most concise doctrinal statements that exist. There's a reason that we still use it today. There are others, the Apostles' Creed. All of these are very, very clear. And I find that highly suspicious. And you should too. Now, I'm not telling you shouldn't say it, but maybe there are bits of it that you want to read again and ask yourself the question, do I really believe this? No one's keeping a record. If you don't believe something, that's okay. Let's talk about what that is, because that's the real power of the church today, is that we can hold that. The Nicene Creed is very clear because it matters the context. And I think we've talked a little bit about that before. For those of you that participate in theology in town, you remember around our Christmas gathering, was that on December the 22nd? We asked a very, very important question, looking around the room. Does Santa Claus exist? Yes, absolutely. St. Nicholas is an important figure, and an important figure in the Nicene Creed as well. One of the folklores around that is the shortened phrase, ho, 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 that Santa Claus says. Really is an abbreviation for homoousios, means of many substances in one kind. Ho, ho, ho. St. Nicholas was a bishop of Myrna. He was part of this Council of Nicaea that helped to write this creed. Also important to know that he had a real issue with the things that were being discussed as this creed was being written. He thought it was very important that we clearly lay out what God is in Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, these three pieces that become one, this Trinitarian figure. But at the time when the council started, it was actually the teachings of Arius that were leading the day, and Arius believed that God was God. And Jesus, though he seemed to have like a little bit of holy in him, was man. Right? And Arius was winning. The Arians were on the way to winning that vote, and Nicholas of Myrna stood up, so outraged, yelling that the people finally said they'd heard enough from him, and a fight broke out. And it's reported that Nicholas of Myrna either slapped or punched Arius, or vice versa. Either way, the people, the other bishops, were so outraged by this that they arrested Nicholas. And overnight, he got a visit from an angel or something, and suddenly he had all of his bishoply garments again when they came to the morning to find him. And because this miraculous thing happened, suddenly he was allowed back into the room, and everyone said, you know, this guy that threw the first punch has something to say. And we have the Nicene Creed as a result of that. The creed came about, and I believe it to be so specific because in the moment, it had to be. This was the first time that the councils of bishops had gathered from the known world. They sat in a council with Constantine, the emperor of Rome, in the room. Y'all want to talk about the relationship between church and state? Let's begin with the Nicene Creed. We have played this game for all of eternity. That's the reason Nicholas was arrested, is because there was a fight in front of an emperor, and this was a mortal sin. He shouldn't have been arrested. He should have been killed if we were on the side of the state. So why is the emperor of Rome in the room with church leaders trying to write a statement of faith? Because the emperor had something in this. He wanted it clear. He had aligned himself politically and militarily with this growing church. There was a whole group of zealots, us, you and me, who believe really strongly about the existence of God and God's work in the world, and we're still trying to figure out what that means, but we know we want to be good people. And Constantine saw that as an opportunity. There's no two ways about it. And so he directed these bishops that he's made this new alliance with to create a clean statement of faith that all people could adhere to. We had a rough history with that. It went back and forth. It found its way eventually into the books that we still have today. And I'll just go out on the limb to tell you there's a whole bunch of stuff in that creed that I have to swallow hard. Not everyone, not even most people, agree with the creed. And I'm not here shoveling dirt on the creed. What I want to tell you is it's one of the beautiful things about the church. Because even in the disagreement, we still use it every single week because it matters to all of us. And it's part of our story, and there's a beautiful way of weaving that into who we are in our complicated nature today that speaks to the reality of the church. You don't have to agree in order to participate. You don't have to agree in order to be part of the conversation. You don't have to agree to receive God's grace. That's why I start the creed every Sunday with, let us tell the story of God's love for us in the words of the Nicene Creed. Because there is a complicated mess on those pages. But written through all of it is a connection that we all have to God's grace. Through the story of God coming to be a part of us, sanctifying our humanity, and lifting it as holy, and remembering those that are with us and those that are not. That's good enough for me. But I can't make sense of all of it. And I don't even want to. Come on down.
This is kind of a pivot, and I'm not sure what my question is, but it strikes me every time we say that we are made in God's image. I can't reconcile that with the evil in the world. I'm having trouble with that.
Yeah, that's a great question as well. I'm not sure that I can really reconcile that for us either. But, Kathy, it is a great question. One has to stop and think about what it means in the way it's presented, that we are bearers of God's image, the Imago Dei, that we have the image of God. This is part of the original theologies that were passed down, and I have always looked at this as a hopeful statement more than a statement of fact. But I also believe it to be a statement of fact, so don't be confused by that. What I mean is, when we think about the fact that we are bearers of God's image, we draw on that based on the words of Jesus. The greatest commandments he's asked, to love your neighbor and to love yourself. Right? To love the Lord your God, to love your neighbor as yourself. So this is tied into that idea. And it's hopeful in my mind because it's really a reminder more than an instruction. Right? If we believe that to be true, that we have this tiny spark of God's light, which is also all the way back to Arius, but that's a much more complicated conversation. But if we believe that, we really do, then it is impossible, even as I said today, to look at anyone that you encounter in the world anyone, and not see God in that person, right? It's just impossible. So when you're watching TV and something's happening on the news, we're cutting Social Security, we're closing a border, we're fill in the gap, we're imprisoning more people, pay attention to what you feel. You don't need to feel bad about it. Just pay attention to it. What's the thing that comes up? Is the first thought, thank God, someone needs to do that, right? Or about time. Or is the thought, oh my God, it's horrible. If we see each other as being God's image, a part of the Godhead, living in this real world, then it doesn't really matter what people think or believe or do or don't do. They're part of something much larger and much holier than anything we can really understand. And it shifts us from a stance of evangelicalism, of trying to convert people, to the stance that Jesus himself said over and over again. Love. Just love the people. Love them in their mess. Love them for exactly what they're going through, because there's something in that for you. That, again, right back to Micah today. I can't let that go. Oh, my people. Oh, my people. We're supposed to feel something. And it's not supposed to be relief. I think it's supposed to be a troubled soul. I think we're supposed to see things even when we don't quite yet understand what we personally believe about them. We're called to see human beings made in the image of God. If they practice a different faith or none at all, if they're white, black, if they're Native American, whatever they are, we are called to see them as God's beloved creation. Our Eucharistic prayer, even today, you made all living things. That means everything is holy. And we have to get comfortable with that discomfort. It didn't say God made all episcopal living things. But it's hard. I think that's why Jesus said it so many times. He almost said it too many times, right? Because we don't get it.
But it's hard to see a redeeming quality in someone who is so evil.
All right, so it's hard to see a redeeming quality in someone that's so evil. Yes. What do you see in evil people? And how do you even define evil? There's an old adage that hurt people hurt people. I believe that to be true. It's not a bit simplistic. But at the end of the day, I do think that part of our journey is seeing the image of God in other people, is trying to imagine what it takes to get a person to that place of hurt, where they feel like there is nothing left for them. Nothing. Except to take a gun into a school, to take a gun into a church, to put migrants on a bus in the middle of winter and drop them off on a cold street with nothing, no money, no phone, no clothes, no family members, to leave innocent people in prison. What does it take for us to be so hurt that we think that's the way forward? I don't have the answer for you. Except that I think a lot of this stuff is what many of us, depending on where we are, and we could go to the opposite side of those examples and look back and go, we can define evil in tons of ways. And the truth is, it's always from our perspective. And seeing people from the image of God means that we begin with the question, how? Not why. How? How did it end up this way? I mean, this is the work of the prophets of the Hebrew Bible, specifically those minor prophets, where they're rending their clothing. They're ripping their clothes. They're sitting in the dirt, throwing ashes in the air, saying, you people need to do something. Well, loving God and seeing the image of God in each other and addressing the injustice in the world is a real call for the church. It's hard for me to say it without a curse word, but we need to rend our clothing. The church should have something for everyone. Those people that feel like there's nothing left. This can be a place. This could be a place. This can be a place. When we let it. It's as simple as how. Other questions? Come on up, Jim.
To follow up on that, you talked earlier about the many, many denominations of Christianity. What's the attraction, or why are certain denominations successful in terms of participation, others not?
Yeah, great question. Why are some denominations better at participation? Well, we all are at some point or another. When I think about the denominations, it's really helpful for me. I'll take it all the way back to seminary again. One of the things that happens when you go to seminary and you go to the Bible classes that are required is you walk in with all the faith that you brought and you think you know something. And then you find out that part of the purpose of those classes in an academic setting is to take everything you believe, to literally break it apart into shreds in front of you, tell you that you are silly, and then help you put it back together through context, through literary interpretation, through everything, through the lens of your fellow colleagues that are in that room, other theologians on the journey. So one day we were studying heretics. I love heretics. They're just interesting. And I was in this hot debate with a Baptist in the room. Why? Because I'm a recovering Southern Baptist, and I like to fight with Baptists. Right? I was convinced that I knew all the right things. And we're going back and forth in front of one of the world's leading scholars, right? Which is so pretentious. And finally, this Baptist just stops me completely in my tracks. And he raises the question, anyone who cared enough to get into this argument was only trying to understand their God. He's right. He's still right. How do some denominations appear to do better than others? Well, it just appears. It's sleight of hand. Every denomination at one point or another on their quest to understand their God and understand the relationship they have with God went through a period of flourishing. Then they decline, and either they stabilize or come back, or they completely disintegrate in spectacular form. It's the best fireworks show you've ever seen to see a denomination completely crumble. So, which ones are doing better today and why? That's a good thing to explore. But that's the only thing I can tell you. We all, as human beings, have certain things that awaken a sense of curiosity for us from time to time. There are certain teachings as they continue to evolve that we go, I want to know more about it. There are also life circumstances that come into play. Least we forget that the church commoditizes Jesus. I mean, Jesus. We turn this into something that you can participate in, as though there's a comment card in the back that you can go, well, I really what I need is this. So you get me that, and then I'll be back. We do it for all the right and wrong reasons. How do we get this demographic or that one in here? How do we connect to our community or not? These are all wonderful things to think about, but easily controlling us. And so some churches do much better. Well, because they're just better at it, right? They're better at operating their cameras than I am. They're better at operating their microphones than I am. They're better at communication than I am. They're better at giving you exactly what you want. They have better coffee. Right? They have better treats. And people respond. And the question is, who stays? It doesn't matter to me, which may sound bizarre. It doesn't matter to me how many people come to church. That is not vitality. Average Sunday attendance has nothing to do with who you are as a community. Nothing. There could be 3 people in here, and it could be the most vibrant community you've ever seen. Or there could be 300, and it could be just as dead as a door. And I have served at both those churches. It doesn't matter who comes or how long they are here. It matters how they engage with their faith. It matters how you struggle with your faith, how you bring questions into the space, how you get into that argument with your God, the same way the people did today. How you take a look at things. I mean, the Bible study people were on this, but I didn't even touch the gospel today. But how you run through that list of blessedness and really sit with the reality that you're going, oh, wait, now what? Blessed is who? Because that's not a blessed life. So how we struggle and how we ask questions and invite that space for others, that's vitality. And that's a church that's way more interesting as a community of faith to me than a place that's just packed to the brim with people just kind of droning through everything and rushing to get to their car before the rest of the mainline Protestants get to the brunch place. Right? But some do better, Jim. There's no 2 ways about it. Some do better. In the Episcopal Church, we were not that interested early on in how to capture everyone's attention. Because we believed, and I believe, by the way, that we don't need to do that. We have everything that people are looking for in a journey of faith. We have settled space. It's holy. It's prayerful. We have rituals and liturgy that speaks to the movement of your life and invites you into a sacred mystery. We do all that stuff every week. The problem is no one seems to know where we're at. And I think it's because we own those things. And we go, I love them so much that I just want to protect them. And we've lost touch with what real evangelism is. And real evangelism is just, hey, I love this place. It means everything to me. Do you want to come check it out with me? Do you want to be my Sunday pal? We've got bad coffee. You can have it. Well, when people come in, when you look at research polls, what people are looking for in faith communities, we have it. We have all of it. We're just not quite so sure how to enter into it. And I think that's the heavier work for us. It's not how do we get more, but how do we create so many pathways into this space that anyone that walks through the door, they do not need to pass any sort of test for how long you've been here, how much money you give, how old you are, what your gender is. If you are interested in working in God's kingdom, whatever that looks like, ushering, bringing up stuff, bearing a chalice, reading, whatever it is that you want to do, you shouldn't have to jump through 10 burning hoops to get there. There should be a room full of people so settled and in love with this place that you're just so excited that someone else wants to do it that you go, come on with me. Let me show you how to do this, and then I'm going to let you do it. Thriving communities transition all the time. They give away jobs. They give away dignity. And that's where people find their entry. I don't know. That may not be a satisfactory answer. But I would still say some of our evangelical brothers, they just have better child care and better coffee, is what I've been told. Other questions? That can't be it. You got 10 whole minutes. Is there any other burning, grave question, Melissa? Yeah, Jim.
It's not exactly a brave question, but would you share with us, as you talked this morning, about your new journey and what that's all about?
Sure, yeah, happy to do that. So my last Sunday will be March 12th. You know this from the letter that I sent you, and I think I've talked about it a few times already. I'll talk more about that. But my call is to be the vicar of St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Atlanta, Georgia. And St. Luke's is one of the largest Episcopal churches in the country, and it is situated right at the sort of line, the demarcation between downtown Atlanta and what's called Midtown. So it's in this sort of balancing act between an older, more poverty-ridden side of town and the gentrifying wall that's sort of bumping right up to it. And St. Luke's is this massive place, and as many Episcopal churches, including this one, is a huge landowner in downtown Atlanta. So they're beginning to ask questions about what they're called to do. And in a time when all mainline churches in Atlanta went through their own transition, Atlanta being a larger city had quite a bit and does still today. In fact, there are riots happening on the street in front of the church that I've been called to serve, which is very interesting. There's a lot of crime there, and there's a tremendous amount of poverty there. And as gentrification continues to happen, and did, Atlanta became more and more of a black city. It still today is a place of real black thriving, financially and otherwise. And so a lot of the mainline churches, as you can look around ours and know this is true as well, they looked around the room and they went, wait a minute, we're all a bunch of white people in the middle of this city. And they left. They literally sold their buildings, moved to the suburbs, and created new churches, and they were there. There are 3 Episcopal churches in downtown, in the greater downtown area, including the cathedral, and St. Luke's is one of those that made a decision to stay. So it is a committed downtown church. It is extremely diverse. So there are as many faces of color in this congregation as there are white people, which is what the Episcopal Church is made of, generally. So it's a very interesting space, and it's quite large in their ministry and outreach. So there on their campus, they offer a feeding program that works year-round. They have a counseling center with licensed clinicians that work there. There are also various ministries that happen in and around that church that include management of endowment. So think loaves and fishes kind of program. So it's a great big community. The director of that church is Winnie. Winnie Varghese ran for bishop here in Chicago and came in sort of second in that election for bishop. And as soon as Paula was elected, Winnie was called to be rector here. Winnie is an interesting woman because she brings a voice to the church that we don't often hear. She is of Indian origin, from India, and she is a married lesbian woman, and she is a world-class theologian. She travels all over the world preaching and teaching, and she has a voice for how God speaks into the most poverty-stricken portions of our life. She's a really fascinating person, and I have sort of gently stalked her for years. She had no idea who I was, but she's one of those sort of church heroes of mine. And so it's a great honor for me to be called to go and support her. So it's a big staff, it's a big place with lots of operations and all the other things that happen with a true corporate parish like that. But my job would be to support her, which is to take care of operations and all the things that go with that, personnel, priests, all of that, so that she can keep being who she's called to be, which is to say, so that she can walk out the front doors and walk down the street to City Hall and have something to say about the conditions for the people in Atlanta, so that she can partner with other leaders and activists in the community to tell the story of God's love in the real world, not in theory, but in real life, so that she can travel and continue writing and speaking and creating the bits of canon that we'll all continue to struggle with. And I'm glad to do that because that's not my call. I am not a world-class theologian. I'm just not. But I do have some gifts to share with her and with that community by way of supporting the church, because I am a parish priest. I was called to do that, we can be sure. But it's just so cool to be able to prepare to serve with her, to help create that system. And don't be confused, that's happening here too. Your search committee is hard at work finding that person that's going to be shaping and molding how you respond in this space. And that's part of the beauty of the church, with a capital C, is that we all are called. And there's no place, no position that is minor. They're all a part of the journey. They're just one step. And my step to Atlanta will not be where I reside the rest of my vocation. You can be sure of that. It's just the next step. And you all are preparing to take the next step with someone as well. And it's going to be terribly exciting. So yeah, that's what's happening there. Thanks for asking.
Excuse me. Can you comment a little bit about what Winnie's position was when she was running for bishop? I think she was Trinity.
Yeah. Yeah, so when Winnie ran for bishop, she was one of a grouping of associates that worked at Trinity Church in Wall Street, which is one of, it is the wealthiest Episcopal church in, I believe I'm right in saying, in the world. So she was one of the staff there that focused on pastoral care and also ministry and teaching within the church. So she had been there for, I believe, 14 years. So she's been kind of a known name in the academic side of the church, working in a congregation like that. You can't help but be. And she was ready to seek a new call. And she'd been a rector before, and so that's how she found herself discerning a call to the episcopate. And but because if you didn't know, there's no like white smoke anywhere. We actually elect these people. It is a campaign that happens, and when she was not successful in that, she was extremely gracious and didn't see that as a defeat, just the next step. And she was in that discernment, and it's how she ended up in the place that she's in. And it really is an interesting space and an interesting time to think about how churches like that and how even churches like St. David's are called to use their resources, and how you serve a community and what that looks like. Because as you know, the Episcopal Church is changing. And for every church like a St. Luke's with a whole bench full of priests in the chancel on a Sunday, there are other churches that haven't had a visit from a priest in months. And so starting to ask the question, how do we serve these other communities with the riches that we have instead of waiting? You know, one of the interesting things about St. Luke's is they have this huge parking lot, a ground level parking lot right across the road on Peachtree Street. It's valued somewhere like $150 million, right? What is a parking lot in a church? There's a great article about this in Christian Century. I don't know if any of you read nerdy things like that, but a great article about this. And the line that stuck with me is a parking lot. We think about it in the church in terms of an opportunity, right? We can get people here, we got parking, we got everything. Well, when they ask the community, what's a parking lot? It is a horizontal wall. A horizontal wall. Most of the time, it's empty. Nothing's happening out there. And when people in communities come to churches and say, hey, we want to do something in your parking lot, we want to have this, you know, most churches go, can't do it. We got the parking. We got to have that parking. It's important. People got to have a place to be. That's how they get here. That's how we get more butts in the pews. That's how we grow. But in reality, when we have that sort of embarrassment of resources, we often forget that they can be community assets. In the space it takes for one regular parking space, you can grow enough food to feed something like 8 people for a year? Could we give up one, right? What happens if you do that? How about programs that use it? We're doing that work here, so don't think this is something far away. We're doing that work here. You're going to see this spring and summer children's groups using our parking lot area and our grass area to practice soccer. Right? That's what turns these assets into something that builds community, so that people know who we are. So these are the kind of interesting questions that I think all churches are called to address, to start thinking about what does church really look like? And interestingly enough, it may be that church doesn't look like worship on Sunday. It will look that way for most of us for the rest of our lives. But just maybe there are other ways that people connect with the divine. And we're called to ask how we use those resources, financial, from real estate, human power. What are we doing to transform our world, or to invite people into a space of transformation, whatever that looks like. And for those families that are just looking for a good place to park to watch their little kids poorly kick around a ball, that's holy. So, yeah, it's an interesting thing. Yeah, Lord. Sure. Does Joel have a position? No, we have faith. No, we have faith. Thank you for asking. That is a big anxiety for us, obviously. He has done some interviews, and there is at least one offer that's there. But, it's not his faith tradition, so he's not going to do it. But you guys pray for him. I'm doing that. You do that too. Because there is an interview that's coming up that is sort of right in line with what he wants to do. And so we're very hopeful for that. But it's sort of this real unknown. And I think, Rachel, I was talking with you about this morning of like, we didn't go to Atlanta because we were called there for additional training, or that this great opportunity was there and I'd been looking for it for months. I mean, this thing sort of came together very quickly because that's exactly how it happened. I didn't even apply there. It wasn't even on our radar. When we thought of all the cities in the world that we might want to live, I'm a little ashamed to say Atlanta wasn't even in the top 15. It wasn't even in the top 20. It just wasn't in our brain. And so when things click together, I believe there's spirit in that. And apparently, my husband does as well, because in order for us to say yes to this call, he turned down a job in Connecticut. That was already, like, we were already doing the paperwork, and I'm biting my nails and go, what am I going to do in Connecticut? Right? So this is a real shift for him as well, which I think speaks of spirit. It speaks of a faith that's larger than any of our denominations, and it will work out. I believe that, because I think we're called to these moments in life, and so it's terribly exciting and terribly fearful, because we just don't know. And of course, the other reality that you all may not know, and it's just part of all of our call, I think, and it's certainly part of mine right now, is I'm moving in March, but Joel can't join me until late June. So when I move out of that house, my husband is unhoused. And that's okay. Like, that's part of the deal, right? But we have to be apart for a period of time in order to make this work, which is incredibly frightening and difficult. And yet, we're like, we can't see any other way. It's like, this is what we're called to do. And so I believe, because we've made those decisions, that it will work out. And it will be unexpected. But it's an interesting time for us. Other questions, thoughts, concerns, brave questions. Thank you for all of your attention and for your conversation today. It's a great gift, and I will invite anyone who feels called to close us in prayer to do so. God, we thank you for this space. We thank you for the gift of conversation and for the friendship and love that we find here at St. David's. With all that we have talked about today, all the questions that we share, help us to continue to see your light in the conversations that we have with each other. We lift all the questions and thoughts and concerns that we have today, together with all those that we carry unspoken in our hearts, and we lift them in the name of Jesus. Thanks, my friends. Have a good Sunday.